G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day and you are having a brilliant weekend so far. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. But as you may know, there is a lot going on and I may be out of a job by the end of next week. Of course, the US, through President Trump, is really tightening down. They're putting the screws on Ukraine to try and come to some sort of negotiated diplomatic end to this war. They're leaving Europe out of it. And Europe is a bit annoyed about it. But at the end of the day, have we seen Europe really try to take into account the reality of the battlefield at this point in time? That is where I believe Trump is sitting at the moment. But we're going to go very deep on that, not only on the peace plan, what Russia may think of this, what Zelensky said about this, some of the difficulties around this, but also where Russia and America, where their trajectories may be crossing over. And where America's big concern is. Within the halls of the White House, within the Pentagon, they may be concerned a little bit about the Donbass. They're significantly less concerned about Ukraine losing the Donbass, a non-NATO partner, a relatively very weak country, compared to Russia moving towards China. So we'll talk about that. Of course, we'll look at the maps. I have a number of geolocations for you today. One geolocation, which is 8.84 kilometers behind the red zone on that southern front. We're seeing that sweep across. So for my linear warfare bros out there, please get your calculators ready. So of course, a lot to go over. Let's jump into it. Now, of course, the weather is starting to get colder in Ukraine too. Now, this is from Ukrainian sources, but I would imagine the Russians are having similar problems on these anti-drone nets that are then made across roads to stop logistics getting targeted. The snow is piling up, and then these are collapsing under the weight as well, which of course, not only then drones can get through it, but then the poles falling creates a logistical struggle of itself. Now, before we have a look at the maps, I just want to point out this because some others are seeing this as well. Article like Politico, Telegraph, all of this have articles along the lines like this, the dark side of Zelensky's rule. Now, the Western media, for the last 4 years, they would not dare say one negative thing about Zelensky, about Ukraine, about any of this. Now, in the past week, we're really seeing a lot more articles like this, suggesting maybe there's creeping authoritarianism, suggesting there's some sort of media control, suggesting there might have been some corruption. And it appears like their narrative is shifting from what was accepted and somewhat jumping ship. Now, Walter Lippmann, in Public Opinion, which I speak about a fair bit, especially around pseudo-environments and propaganda, where you don't need to lie to make a mistruth. So he said the media shapes what people think, and politics then follows those media-shaped opinions instead of real conditions. And this is what we see all throughout the world, but also in the news over the past years as well. Okay, so before we jump into what Trump has said, what Zelensky has said, and what is being done and break down why in diplomatic circles, why in geopolitical circles, we'll do the maps. So where we need to start is down in the south. But of course, here we have Ukraine, the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014. Any red check, that is ground confirmed made over the past 24 hours. Why is it confirmed? Well, if a Ukrainian map with ties to Kyiv, if they are saying that Russia has advanced, we will confirm it. Same as if it was a Russian map with ties to the MOD saying that Ukraine advanced. Okay, that's our threshold. Otherwise, we need multiple different sources. Let's come down into the southern region. Huliapol front line, Pokrovskoy front. We typically call this the Velika Novosilka, this southern area where this is not only moving, but it's moving more quickly. It's more than halfway between Wuhledar and Zaporizhia, where the Cope trolls are saying, don't worry, it's 6 months till a city 5 times the size of Zaporizhia. When it's 6 months now, it was 1,000 years a few months ago. Linear warfare bros, my favorite. Let's have a look on this Pokrovsky front line. And where we're going to be looking is in this Radizne area, way out here from Persho-Travneve. And I saw Syriac's maps and I think, this looks a bit, whatever we see in, we see in the direction of Radizne. There's some Ukrainian ground made just to the north of here, but Russian advancement under in that direction. But again, this is where Ukraine's pushed back into Nechayevka and Radizne. And then in his next update, showing that Radizne and Nechayevka then have been taken under control of the Russian forces. And I thought, well, that's a lot different to these maps. Let's measure it while we're here. Nachayevka to here, 8.35. Radenske, as close as I can to the geolocation to here, we're talking 8.97. Maybe my measuring was off, but we have this geolocation here, 2 Russian flags going up. Now the front line is porous, but 9 kilometers, that is where you are reaching into positions with drone operators, with artillery. And this is a big, big problem because those which were on second, third line, if you're having groups go this far back, that's a huge problem. And Ukraine is massively reliant on drones, way over-reliant on drones. We've been calling that for a long time. Many people are starting to come to the forefront and go, yeah, drones can't yet replace a man on the front line. And here we have that geolocation. Again, I'm just showing you screenshots of the geo confirmations. Now, let's have a further look while we're in the south. We'll come down to then Huliapol. Now, I didn't delete it. Of course, my mispronunciation people get a laugh out of. Just to the northeast of here, more ground being made. And of course, then further enveloping this area. You can see with this grey zone, he's saying is under control, and further around Zeleny Hay front as well. We see on this map, there's a little bit of red check in the direction of Stepnogorsk, while the island boys have got out of the pool wrapping and they are now in Stepove. Now, the next place we need to go is this whole Liman front. Now, this can be confusing because occasionally we call it Siversk, occasionally we call it Liman, occasionally we call it Terni. Now, why can we chop and change between these? Firstly, poor English. Secondly, it should be recognised that these are not mutually exclusive, that this is all part of the same thrust, and this has huge effects north, huge effects west, and of course, the largest down to the south around Sloviansk. And this is a front that didn't move for a very years, and it is now moving. So we'll quickly look at some of the maps, and then we'll look at the geolocations, as I think that says a lot more than the maps. So that Yampil is coming then fully under control. This is Yampil down in here by Mr. Suryak Maps, as well as further movement in and around Liman down into these forested regions as well. And down below, of course, is Siversk, where more ground is coming under control around Zavnivkia as well. Remember, a lot of grey zone around here. I think, someone remember this for me because I'll forget, I think this month, November, is going to be the largest difference between Deep State's kilometre squares and AMK Suryak that we see so far in the war. We'll see. And then we have Stavke, ground being made around, of course, Liman front, but also Stavke Russian movement there. Okay, so let's have a look again, because geolocations are better than maps in some scenarios, especially when things are saying vastly different. Of course, this is Stavke up in here. And let's have a look. Now, the first place we're going to start is Yampil. This is Yampil. We have 4 geolocations. We have 4 flags going up. Now, they are ripping down the Ukrainian flags here, and they then fly a Russian flag here. Again, it's just one of the screenshots of that video, but this is all the way down in this grey zone here. Now, the next one we have is in the center of Stavke. Let's actually measure this to try and get an idea. So let's go. It's actually near this bend. So here to here's closest, 4 kilometers back. We have this flag going up. Now, then we'll move to further. We have Novoselivska. So Novoselivska, Dobrosheve, this is also Liman. Novoselivska right here, we have these 2 reservoirs. Take note of the southern reservoir on the western side, and on the eastern side of Novoselivska, we have then 2 flags going up as well. This is just one of them there. So multiple flags moving on multiple sectors. Yampil sector, Stavke sector, Novoselivska, but all in that then southwestern direction towards Liman, and then looping around Siversk, Sloviansk. We could see a very deep pocket develop around then Siversk. Now, let's step into our final maps before we get into more of the politics. Kupiansk. This, a lot of grey zone around here. We know both Ukraine and Russia have had recent successes around Kupiansk. Now, we do see today 3 maps going up, down in the south, on the eastern side, and in the centre. These are just the geolocations for the flags. Now, Suryak, he says he doesn't have a map, but he says 80% of Kupiansk is now under Russian control. So we'll wait on that map. but talking about further advancements in that sector as well. While we're up in the north, let's go to the Terney-Borova pocket, Borosivka and Rivka front line in here, and we do see further that Surak is saying that the Russians have advanced, as well as Ukraine just on that northern top. Now, what we've spoken about is then the forces in Zazove, Borislivka. This is very risky because it's only a few kilometres in the pocket. It is Sursky's cargo shorts, about 15.0 at this point in time. Let's continue our way down. Then we have the Konstantinivska front line. Let's have a look here. Suryak, Ivanov and Lilia, more ground being made, of course, coming up through just this sector right in here as we see the first troops really starting to meet Konstantinivska. Now, on the northern side of Pokrovsk, we see some red in here, as well as the island boys of Pokrovsk heading around there. Northern side, we see Suryak showing that in that west, or east to west direction, that Russia is having success in the direction of Shakovka. Now, Pokrovsk actual, there's some red in here. In my honest opinion, all of Pokrovsk is red except for some tiny little bits on the outskirts, but effectively it is red under control. We see that map catching up. I think it looks more something like this. We see a little bit of ground being made down along the railway. See this grey zone right here? I think that is maybe new. No, yes, apologies. So that grey zone pushing out there, indicated on this map here, as well as Suryak, I think, was a bit behind down in the bottom Lysivkia, Sukriya area, and is now swallowing that up along the rail line down around where this grey, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, as this further squeezes and squeezes on Minograd and forms a tunnel, not a pinch, to get out of here. At this point in time, this will be a big part of negotiations as well. If this takes place on Thursday, I guarantee, maybe not publicly, behind closed doors, Trump will be like, well, what about this? Remember, regardless of what you think of the American intelligence services, they will be delivering, hopefully, their own intelligence reports to Trump. Remember, we think there's been some intel reports that paint a far more rosy picture delivered to Trump before. Okay, so let's talk about all the situation with the 28-point piece. Now, if you want to look at each one of them, go through my video yesterday. We're not going to be doing that. This is then from Sam. Trump gives Ukraine days to accept his plans. He said on radio, I've got a lot of deadlines, but if things are working well, you tend to extend the deadlines, but Thursday is it. So if things are going well, maybe. But Thursday, this is when it is happening. This is when Zelensky needs to accept it. And this is something people are seeing is Trump is not saying Putin needs to accept it, Russia, blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, it seems that Russia and America have come to something and it's on Zelensky. That's how we're seeing it then spoken of. That the ball is now in Zelensky's court. Now, what do I think of this? Now, it was never going to be fair when the front line is not fair. But I think the choices comes really down to capitulation or annihilation. And as long as then a unconditional surrender is not on the table, which it could be at some point, the options are bleak. But it may be, this is, in my opinion, the best it is going to get. And if this is pushed back and the US walk away, the next offer is going to be significantly worse. Now, Trump has said this in some interviews as well, that Zelensky, that he'll have to like it. And if he doesn't, well, I guess they just have to keep fighting. But at some point, he'll have to accept something. He speaks about the spat in the Oval Office. He should have made a deal a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. Maybe someone should go speak to Mr. Boris Johnson. Now, there's a bit actually missed in this, that a senior White House official said the Ukrainians will have to accept the deal given the weakness of Zelensky's current position. It is strongly implied to the Ukrainians that the US expects them to agree to a deal. Of course, in this, there would be large swaths of territory. It is appearing de facto, but I couldn't see Russia even entertaining it if Crimea and Donbass isn't de jure, but would cede large swaths to Russia and limit the size of its military for exchange for ill-defined security. So Ukrainian military would have to be, I believe it's about 60,000, which would still be a very large military given Ukraine's population and given their economy. That's still significantly bigger than, say, the Australian military, which probably has a very similar population now, if not larger. And the security guarantees, no one knows, but it's not going to be NATO. But let's speak about this current position, because I think a lot of people who have been drinking the Kool-Aid don't actually realise the current position of where the US is looking. Now, this huge corruption scandal, this came at the worst possible times. It's Zelensky's old mates. It's his business partners. It's people in politics with him. He's not sacking people and they have fled. Worst possible time, because we know there needs to be tens of billions of dollars more to the tune of 60 to 80 billion next year that's unconfirmed. Bad time. The US is not going to be doing that. They're in a manpower crisis. But speaking of manpower, we speak about manpower at the front, okay? Let's go further down. There is a AWOL desertion crisis. Way more are going AWOL than are being conscripted. Let's go another one. There is a demographic crisis as well, which gets far worse every day, not only from wounded and killed on the front line, but also for refugees leaving. The longer this goes on, the worse situation it gets, the less people are going to return home after the war as well. So this all goes into that. Now remember, the demographers who talk about the demographics, they are, when they release their predictions on the Ukrainian population, they are assuming 1991 borders and people return home, and working off the somewhat official figures of like 50,000-ish killed. Okay, so that all goes into population. Now, there is no guarantee of funding. The EU, they cannot replace the US. They can't replace them in funding. They cannot replace them in military. They can't replace them in intelligence. They can't do that. And you're asking the EU, who are very uncomfortable about these frozen assets also. In the current position, Russia is still increasingly taking ground at a faster rate. The Ukrainian energy grid is getting smashed, and the sanctions upon Russia, yes, they're having an effect, but they are nowhere near the desired effect of this. And that is, in my opinion, as I'm seeing it, that is the reality. Now, we can look at the current position of Russia too. They've had large losses. They are having, of course, big problems economically with oil, with this, with that. But this is what we are looking at. Because, why? Because from Trump and his administration, they're like, the ball is in Zelensky's court. Now, this is where we need to be realists about this, okay? There's a lot of idealists out there. You need to be a realist if you're trying to assess this. The US acts in a very different way on the international stage than other states. Why? Because they are a regional hegemon. They are the most powerful country in the world currently. They have to look far further away than their neighbours. Even Germany, Poland, whoever, they still look very locally. The US, they have to look everywhere. Now, something I've spoken about at length for a long time now is China's rise, the concern the US has. That's why I said they're the most powerful country at the moment. And China's rise is threatening to overtake the US as the global power. We saw China, they did not back down when it came to tariff wars. They are not backing down in any sector. Massive population, massive economy, so your potential power is huge. Demographic issues, yes, I've spoken about that before because I don't trust the numbers in that at all. Still, even collapsed in half would still be double the US population and that rise that we see. Now, strategists who are not just sucking Kool-Aid out of an acceptable narrative slong, they realise that one of the levers in an attempt to slow China's rise, the lever to pull is actually Russia. That's one of the levers. We see Australian strategists talk about this, that as unpopular as it is, we may have to actually open up back to Russia to try and slow down China, bringing Russia back into some sphere of influence or partnership away from China. Why is Russia so valuable to a country like China? Massive amounts of energy, resource, minerals, all of that. Massive amounts of agriculture, huge amounts of land into other sectors in the world. Specific technologies, jet engines, submarines, anti-submarines, drones, of course, being able to paradrop armoured vehicles, and of course, the world leaders in electronic warfare at the moment. And of course, just tactics, doctrine, experience. The biggest one, though, I still believe is Arctic power. Why do you think Trump talks so much about Greenland? Now, this is where it gets a little bit, we need to be sort of ultra realist about how the US sees this stripping everything away. To the US, Russia is only at least militarily, the only risk they have to America is nuclear strategic threat. Russia is not about to roll tanks or troops into US. No, militarily, the threat to the US from Russia is nuclear weapons. Now, Russia's strategic nuclear assets, these have been untouched. ICBMs, submarines, Tu-160s, untouched. They're still all there. So the strategic threat to the US doesn't only remain the same, it's actually higher because instability increases the risk of use of systems like this. So the military threat, that never went away. That is still there under mutually assured destruction. This is where the European states see it differently. Now, Russia may have been weakened for the European states, of course, on a border with armoured vehicles, with infantry, with land power. I need to annex myself in that and say, I could argue back on this point, though, with a simple question. Would you rather fight 2022 Russia or 2025 Russian land forces? Depending on your answer to that, you can prove or disprove, or at least for your own analysis, what I've said about the weakening there. But we're just talking about the threat in this. Now, so the threat remains the same for the US, arguably, though, with more tensions and potential instability. That's still there. This is where the US is looking far more globally. Of course, NATO, US's arm of power into here, and the tensions there, but Trump having far more of an isolationist view. Let's further. Now, I'm still pretty confident in my assessment that Putin isn't completely serious about this, that he is using poison pill diplomacy. Yes, the 28-point peace plan, or whatever we want to call it, it has more concessions for Ukraine. Of course it does. But it's still, from Putin's stated goals, is still a concession from those stated goals. Now, there's two ways this could be. Either the situation for the Russian land forces is assessed in the Kremlin as it is worse than we are seeing, and therefore we need to make concession and pull back from those stated goals. Or, which I think is more likely, is this. By entertaining the US proposals, knowing Zelensky and the European leaders that they will highly likely not accept this, then they can cheaply get the US to pull their support, therefore have more success in the front line. Either way, even if Ukraine keeps fighting, backed by Europe, I think either way we'll see the US reopen trade, reopen partnerships with Russia, given the points before, which I can go into far more deeply if you'd like, about where the gaps are in Russia and China and how they really do fill each other. Now, I think I watch this war as closely as anyone, and I believe the latter, that it's a poison pill diplomacy. Now, I did speculate that a Russian-US partnership, I'm saying friendship, I'm saying working group partnership, trade, whatever. Now, as we see the US grow further conservative and Europe grow further progressive, as a blanket, if you will, I assess that Trump's transactional politics, his beefing up of an oligarch class, Musk, the dork from Meta, Peter Thiel, these, they would be an oligarch in one country, but you call them entrepreneurs in this, but they are controlling the media. They're controlling the algorithms. They're controlling this, that. You get what I mean. So with Trump's transactional politics, his oligarch class, further religiosity coming back into America, and a sense of real politics, sorry, that's spelt wrong with a C, not a K. So power, you're respecting power over ideology. I believe that it is closer with Putin's Russia than it is with von der Leyen's Europe. That's what I think. If you got Trump blindly to write down what he believes to hold dear, especially in politics, diplomacy, von der Leyen to do it, Putin to do it, I think the US would be closer to Russia than to modern day Afghanistan. I mean, Europe. So let's have a look. So it's been presented. Let's have a look at what Zelensky has said. Now, I actually do believe I didn't record the audio on this, but Trump in this, he talks about basically distancing himself from the war, which is not surprising, but it's not going to work. It's Biden's war, this, that. That's bullshit. I'll just clip in parts of that. But let's look at what Zelensky has said. And he had a address to the nation, which you've probably seen. Now, there comes a moment in life where every nation, when everyone needs to talk things through, honestly, calmly, without speculation, rumours, or gossip, without anything extra. The right now is one of our hardest moments in history. Ukraine is under some of the heaviest pressure yet. Right now, Ukraine may find itself facing a very tough choice. Either the loss of our dignity or the risk of losing a key player. So we'll either lose our dignity or we'll lose a key partner, being the US. It's not a key partner, it is the partner. And we'll remember the word dignity because he talks about this throughout. Either the difficult, remember, when Ukrainians use the word difficult, it means catastrophic. Either the difficult 28-point plan or an extremely hard winter, the hardest yet, and the dangers that follow, a life without freedom, without dignity, without justice. And that we trust someone who has already attacked us twice. So we choose this or the extremely hard months to come. They will expect an answer from us. Though the truth is, I already gave my answer on May 2019, taking the oath of loyalty, saying about the sovereignty and independence, the constitution of the laws, and to fulfill my duties. I'm reading this as I've already given my answer. It's for full sovereignty and independence for the constitution, that there's not going to be any sort of concession made. We're not making loud statements. We'll work calmly with the US and with all partners. There has to be constructive search for solutions with our main partner, US. I'll lay out the arguments. I will persuade. I will offer alternatives. But one thing is certain. We will not give the enemies reason to claim that Ukraine doesn't want peace. That is sabotaging the process. And that is Ukraine that is not ready for diplomacy. That will not happen. What I will say is, even if you are a linear warfare bro, what you are doing by linear warfare is you are still giving a date of which Russia will achieve its goals. Even if you say they won't achieve this goal for 1,000 years, yes, but you can see that they may achieve the goal. Where Ukraine's goals of 1991 borders, you're bragging about losing more slowly. And in my wheelhouse, if you ask me as an analyst, Willie, can Russia achieve the goal of taking the Donbass militarily? The answer is yes. Huge cost, years of war. Can it be done militarily before an economic collapse? I believe so. Of course, I don't want to do it that way. It's incredibly costly. But if you ask me, can Ukraine take back Crimea, take back Donetsk, take back? The answer is no. You haven't been shown at a single point to be able to do so. So again, with these realpolitik transitional leaders, you see where Putin and Trump have tended to come to somewhat of a medium. Now, I'll fight for this, or among all the points, at least two are not overlooked. These are the dignity and the freedom of Ukrainians, because everything else rests on this: our sovereignty, our independence, our land, our people, and Ukraine's future. We will and must do everything. As a result, the war ends, but Ukraine does not end, Europe does not end, nor does global peace. We count on European friends who fully understand that Russia is not somewhere far away. That is something that Trump talks about in this video here, that it's not really in our region, it's over an ocean. It's right next to the borders, that Ukraine today is only shielded, separate and comfortable European life from Putin's plans. Now, these plans, this is pulled out of fucking thin air about plans to walk through fucking Munich. It just doesn't actually go to reality or Russia's actual military power. But of course, we've seen this drummed up to create that environment of support. But can our European friends, realistically, the support given from Europe's European partners, given the rhetoric of, Macron and his husband and this and that, the rhetoric versus reality of support, there's a fucking pretty big gulf between that. Ukrainians are, first of all, human beings. This is what I've been speaking about for a long time. Ukraine is and belongs to the Ukrainians first, before then the territorial borders. And Ukraine exists because of Ukrainians, rather than Ukraine exists because of this line on the map. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's just. I'm not justifying. But I'm saying if it is annihilation of a populace through demographic crises, losses, blah, 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 versus a line on the map, I know where it should be chosen, even if it is incredibly difficult. And for almost 4 years full scale, we've been holding back one of the largest armies on Earth. But we thought this army had no real power. That's what we're being told. But the tone has shifted dramatically. Now, there's a lot of empty words given from Zelensky's partners, and Zelensky in himself, he talks about this. But what we have seen is Zelensky's friends, business partners, politicians, that they have enriched themselves recently to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and fled the state. They're not being called back. Some of them aren't even being sacked. Trust in Zelensky remains at an all-time low and very, very fractured. If this is accepted, I'd have a lot of concern for Zelensky. Remember, the first day of the war, most of us made our choice, the choice for Ukraine, the continuation here, fighting for dignity, freedom. Now we need unity more than ever. It can be a dignified peace in our home. Now again, dignified peace, this is purposely very vague. We've seen the goal become more and more and more vague, more opaque throughout. But again, with this too, you need to be looking internally and look at some of your good friends, Zelensky, who you were caught up in the Pandora files of embezzlement with. Did they make that choice? Or did they not have $100 million more going towards, coming from your Western partners into things that would have saved people's lives? I'm addressing all Ukrainians, people, citizens, politicians, everyone. We need to pull ourselves together, regain senses, quit the squabbling, stop the political games. No, looking into this, now I agree with quit squabbling around, but if it's serious, like your best mate stole $100 million and has a gold fucking toilet shitting on the population, the state must function. The parliament of a country must work in unity. The government of a country of a war must work effectively. And all of us together must not forget, we must not confuse who is exactly the enemy of Ukraine today. Now, of course, you'll say simply, yes, the enemy of Ukraine today is Russia. But also, the betrayal of Ukraine as well lies with a hell of a lot of individuals as well. I did not betray Ukraine then, and I felt your support behind me. We did not betray Ukraine then and will not betray it now. I know for certain in this truly most difficult moments in our history that he's not alone. We need to secure a dignified peace and to persuade them, knowing the absolute certainty the people of Ukraine stand behind me. But again, this is, yes, it can be said like this, great, hurrah, whatever. Are we seeing this then turn into hundreds of thousands of men rushing to recruitment centres or not running away from the mafia of conscriptors? No, we are not. It's all well and good that the people who live in Lviv, the people who have fled to Europe, NAFO online, are fucking clapping their webbed hands together, their webbed fingers together. But is it turning into a fighting force? Is there money to support that fighting force from the Europeans? This is when we come to the reality. It's niceties, great. The coming week will be difficult and full of events. You're a mature, wise, conscious nation that has proven it many times, and you understand there'll be enormous pressure this time, political pressure, information, all kinds designed to weaken us, to drive a wedge between us. The enemy never sleeps, and will do everything to make us fail. So there's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of talking. They want us to fail, drive a wedge in here. The biggest wedge that I've seen recently has been the corruption scandal. Now, what we've noticed over the past 12 to 18 months, Zelensky, the European partners, the media, they've become far more vague, far more opaque about what constitutes victory. It went from nothing short of 91 borders, Putin in prison, this, that, and the rest, to a collapsed Russia, and to then what we see throughout of dignified peace. Now, the pressure that the US can apply on Ukraine through leverage is enormous. Very funnily enough, we've spoken about this before, the pillars of sovereignty. But funnily enough, by cutting off Russian gas and oil to Europe, this has actually increased America's leverage, as Europe's sovereignty away from the US has shrunk. What do you mean by that? By cutting off Russian gas, who Europe is at a war with, Europe is less sovereign and America has more leverage. Well, okay. You have three pillars of sovereignty: a trade, military, and energy. Of course, Europe is completely reliant on the US for trade and military. It did have a balance with Russia against energy. By now, that energy being somewhat switched off, we'll call it switched off, now being very reliant on the US for LNG, for oil, etc., the actual leverage America now has on Europe is actually more. Now, how do I read what Zelensky said here? Well, I'm sort of 50-50 on this. Now, some of it I read as preparing the people for a loss, but to maintain dignity, keeping it opaque, but then shifting blame onto President Trump. As I've always said, the war that was unwinnable well before Trump, the war was unwinnable, well before Trump, but the narrative will become, we would have won if not for Trump. That is how this will be sold. The other side I read as preparation to fight until the end without the US. The US obviously has a want to end this war. Sorry, I've misspelt in here. The EU. Sorry, I misread. The EU obviously has no want to end this war, regardless of the cost Ukraine incurs, regardless of their survival. The EU's first goal, Kaja Kallas said this, the first goal is to weaken Russia. And we've seen this is the way it has acted. We've seen this is how the sanctions roll, and we've seen this with deliveries. We've seen this by not giving equipment. We've seen this with not being realistic. The goal in this is to extend, weaken Russia. Now, where Europe sees strategic interest in this, the war is not militarily existential for the European states. At this point in time, given the war, given the cost, given the this, given the that, Russia's not about to roll through these borders. And if they did, they would be obliterated. The length of time to get there, all of that, especially if Article 5 was enacted. What is existential for the European states is it is ideologically existential, and it is existential for the current leaders who have been backing this, whatever it takes, however long it takes, we will win, blah, 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 and the credibility of their word as well for Europe. But on the other side, having to free up those assets completely undermines and reduces the credibility of the euro. See how difficult this is. But for the US, they need to be looking at large, grand, scheming strategy. The European states are looking very locally. And if we look at it through that lens, it does make sense. Again, a lot of these accounts, a lot of these countries, they're asking for this to be done on the behalf of them, but with Ukrainian blood and suffering and the existence of the state. Will Ukraine accept this? I don't know. I think that, honestly, reading through it, it's not great. It's not terrible. It's really not. I expected it actually to be significantly worse for Ukraine. If the US withdraw, how does that look? Catastrophic. With the US there now, it's fucking bad. The US withdraw, and that's why I think it's more poison pill diplomacy coming out of the Kremlin. It's going to be a big couple of days. This is going to be a big week. Legends, you have a fantastic day. You look after yourselves. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.